Hello everyone, and welcome to our Sunday video, taking a little trip down memory lane and looking at one of the teams from the past in FPHL history. Today, that team is the Dayton Demonz. And yes, that is spelled correctly, Demonz. For those of you who have Sheetz gas stations around, you know, the thing they do with the Z at the end of everything. Dayton did that as well. All their social media posts, instead of plural S, it was plural Z, so they had their little thing going. All right, and I've entitled this The Dynasty That Wasn't, and that's because, well, we'll find out as we talk about this. One of the very good teams of the early years of the Fed, but it just didn't work out. Why was that? Well, we'll talk about that. All right. So the Dayton Demonz they came around during the third season of the FPHL. Now, during the second season, the team granted an expansion franchise to Danville, Illinois, the original Danville Dashers, owned by Barry Soskin. And yeah, that you think Topeka was an outpost then? Right now, back then, Danville was just in the middle of nowhere. You had all these teams in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, and one in Illinois. So obviously, there were some teams that weren't doing too well. One of them included was the Brooklyn Aviators that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So when the Aviators folded, when that happened, almost immediately, their webpage immediately redirected people to the Dayton Devils page. And there was no affiliation. There was nothing between the two teams, but the league did that. So anyway, yes, originally they were going to be called the Devils. And there was a possibility of some legal backlash from that. So the name was changed to Demonz, and that became their thing. Okay, so Barry Soskin owned Dayton. Now, this was good for the league in a couple different ways when this was initially announced. First of all, it gave Danville a travel partner, spread the league out a little bit more evenly. You now had a couple teams out west. All right, the second way that this was really good was this was another larger market move for the Fed. Okay, they had a team in Brooklyn, of all places, and it didn't work. So now this was a move into a bigger hockey market. Now, I'm not talking about a big market in population size. I'm talking about Dayton was, for many years, kind of a hotbed for hockey activity. There were teams in the old IHL for many, many years. And a lot of people forget that when the World Hockey Association, competitor to the NHL, was announced in 1971, originally one of the franchises granted was to Dayton, Ohio. They were going to be the Dayton Arrows. Didn't work out. The team ended up relocating with a new management group in Houston, became the Houston Arrows. Gordie Howe played for them along with his two sons and helped make WHA history. But getting back to the Fed, all right, this was in the aftermath of the Dayton Gems of the old CHL, Central Hockey League, folding. All right, so there was a vacancy, and there was an arena, Hara Arena. The place had seen better days. it was never a great arena to begin with, just as far as the quality of the building. It was this complex, an entertainment complex that was piecemealed together beginning in 1957. The arena was added in 1964. It was like a 6 or 7 building complex, and the arena was just part of it. Being piecemealed together, it wasn't the greatest construction job ever done. And so by the time the Demonz got into Hara Arena, it had seen better days. Much better days. The place was literally falling apart at the seams. But it was a nice arena, 5,500 seats, biggest arena at that time in the FPHL. And so, Barry Soskin went with it. All right. At this time, the league was 6 teams. You now had Dayton. You had Danville Dashers. Then you had Danbury Whalers, Thousand Island Privateers, who became the Watertown Wolves. You had the Williamsport Outlaws, and they would kind of play an interesting part in the picture. And then we also had the Cape Cod / New York Bluefins, a franchise that was in deep distress. But start of the year, you had six teams. All right, so some of the key players that played for the Demonz in their 3-year history. You had Ahmed Mahfouz, greatest player all time in the Fed. You had Trevor Karasevich. You had Dustin Skinner. Some of you are familiar with him. They had Brian Marks, the first defensiveman to score a point per game in a season. Jonathan Giuliano, Jules, he played for the Demonz. Chris Lavelle, he was there. Lester Brown, he's still playing. Edgar Zozelich. You had Justin Browson. Briefly, he began his Fed career in Dayton. And Dan McWhinney, goaltender. So, a lot of good players. And this team was very good. And they had bones. If you saw my Facebook post a couple days ago, you saw bones there. Kind of looked like a gangsta pirate. Something. But anyway, Bonez. And again, the Z was the thing. Okay, so we get into the first year of play, and Dayton promised to be a very competitive team. As a matter of fact, they were so competitive, they were darn right good. They dominated the league. 42-6-3, 123 points. That was an .804 winning percentage. Finished first, obviously. But they lost to the Danbury Whalers in the in 3 straight. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was 3 straight games. So, they were really good. They dominated, but at the end, they ended up not making it. And a lot of that had to do with the sudden mid-year folding of the Williamsport Outlaws, who were the New Jersey Outlaws the year before. They had won the championship as the New Jersey Outlaws. And the team had to fold. They basically got shut out of their arena. If you call it an arena, it was a ballpark. Yep. Ice rink on a ballpark surface. So anyway, Williamsport was very good. Had a lot of good players. And some of those players ended up coming over to Dayton when there was a dispersal draft, including Trevor Karasevich. What was it? Billy McCreary for a couple games. I think 5 games? Not many. But anyway, the team was coached by Mark Lefebvre. And I thought this was interesting because it's like, where did I know that name? Mark Lefebvre is still coaching. This was his first coaching gig here in Dayton. He is now the coach of the Dundee Stars in the Elite Ice Hockey League in England. So yeah, and he's been a coach there for about 4 years now. So anyway, attendance was good for this point in history for the Fed. They averaged 1146. Now I know you're saying, but the arena sat 5,500 people. The only team that was drawing consistently well was Danbury. They were getting crowds much like what they get today with the hat tricks. But other than that, teams didn't crack the 1,000 mark per game. This was again a brand new league, so it was still gaining traction, but pretty good crowds for that day and age. They did have one game in which they drew 1,585. That was their big crowd during the first year. Now, the first game, their initial game, was in Williamsport, opening night for the Fed, and there was a crowd of 3,447 to watch Dayton beat the Outlaws 5-2. So, yeah, at that time, that was the record crowd for the Fed. All right, so 12-game winning streak during this year, too. So the team was making some serious noise. They only lost one game in regulation all year at home. All right, so we go to year 2, and this is the year that, even though the record wasn't as good, this was the year. Lefebvre had moved on to other options and other possibilities, different positions, and in came Trevor Karasevich. Started the year as a player coach. He only played 10 games, and then he just said, I'm just going behind the bench full time. And that was a really good move, actually. Even though Karasevich was an extremely gifted individual. So that second year, they finished 40-14-3. 116 points. That was second in the league by 1 point. Yep, they were 1 point behind Danbury. So they go to the playoffs and first of all beat Watertown. It's now the Watertown Privateers. Last year they'd be called the Privateers. And beat them 2-1. And then they go and face off against Danbury. And what a battle. Very close games. The first 3 games all decided by 1 goal. Fourth game, 3-1. So we're tied up. We go to Danbury. Danbury's got the decided home ice advantage, but Dayton explodes for 9 goals. They win 9-2 and win the championship. So it was a great end of the year swan song, so to speak, for the season. Championship banner raised. The cup was a totally different Commissioner's Cup. Looked totally different. They lifted that, and this really capped off a year that was very difficult. Attendance issues. Team only averaged 881 per game. Their biggest crowd of the year was 1358. And they had a lot of transportation issues. They had problems securing a bus. They had problems having a bus that ran. A lot of transportation issues, a lot of money that was spent in that area. So not a profitable year for the club, even though they had won the championship. One of the highlights of the year, the final home game, March 28th. It was the final game of the regular season. The Demons are playing against their rival, the Danville Dashers. Mark Puntereri for the Dashers and Jesse Felton for the Demons meet with 9:51 left in the game. It's already 4-0 in favor of the Demons. And they drop the gloves, skate out the center ice, and hug. And Matt Puntereri pulls a can of warm beer out of his pant shell. They chug the beer, salute the crowd, Yeah, Matt Punterri said in hindsight, I shouldn't have kept it in my pants all game long because by the time I drank it, it was warm. But Jesse Felton and Punterri were actually very good friends, very close, and they took a lap with a can of beer, toasting the crowds arm in arm. So, it was a nice little thing, and for his troubles, Matt Punterri summarily got suspended for his lifetime from the Fed. So, Jesse Felton served a suspension for the playoffs. Couldn't play in the playoffs, but he was back the next year. Anyway, so that I'm sorry, he was back 2 years later. But anyway, that was the highlight of the year, so to speak. All right, we go to year 3. The team is 38-14-4, 113 points. Again, very, very good. First place out of 6 teams. But this time, they'd had some roster issues. The roster wasn't quite as dominant as it had been the first 2 years, and there had been a lot of trades that were made. The team never had a consensus goalie. The first 2 years, their number one goalie was Jeff Rose. He won 41 games in 2 years. Was the playoff MVP during the championship year. This year, Jeff Rose wasn't around. They went through 5 different goaltenders overall. But Dan McQuinney was the best of the ones they had. He went 10-3-1, 253 goals against, 932 save percentage. Good numbers. But once you got to the playoffs, Danville, who was very much on the rise and playing very good, they ended up beating the Demons 2-1. Now, once the season ended, this is where all the fallout happened. There have been tough negotiations with Hara Arena. Hara Arena was beyond broke. They were in arrears with their taxes. The arena, not the team. All right, they were in arrears with their taxes. They were struggling to make ends meet. They were trying to get events into the complex and spending more money than they had. There was also a legal battle within the family that owned Hara Arena. So Barry Soskin said, I've had enough of this nonsense. And he bails. Little precursor. So right now, the Demons are a team without an owner. So the league appoints Herm Sorcher from the Danbury Hat-Tricks, and back then from the Whalers. He appointed him as managing partner of the Demons entity, which, even though nobody knew it, this was now nothing more than a paper organization. They were looking for a new owner, since Barry no longer had any interest in the team. That's because he had switched all his focus on to Danville and his new expansion team, Port Huron, which we'll talk about in just a second. All right, so Herm Sorcher gets to work trying to keep the Demons afloat, working out a deal with Hara Arena, which he does. On June 4th, it's announced, got a new lease with Hara Arena. There's going to be professional hockey in Dayton next year. The only thing was that it wasn't specified what team that would be. And again, the Demons were now just basically notes in a notebook as opposed to an actual organization. Now, the new expansion team, the Port Huron Prowlers, was announced on April 2nd. This was immediately after the season. So Soskin said, bye, Dayton, I'm going to Port Huron. So we have a new lease agreement, but no team. So the Berkshire Battalion, 1-year wonder in New Jersey, or in New England, not so much a wonder. They struggled. financially and on the ice. They announced that they're going to move to Dayton on July 15th, 2015. This is the first indication that the public got that the Demons were no more, because now there's another team moving to Dayton in the Fed. And so the team was named the Demolition. Harbinger. That was an omen. We'll explain this a little bit. The very next day after the Demolition announced we're moving to Dayton, the Prowlers announced that they had obtained the Dayton Demonz protected list. Yes, they did the protected list even back then because the league recognized the need for expansion into new markets. So this has been a regular practice for the FPHL. But suddenly, the roster was transferred. Now, could be very similar to what we had this last year, where we have the PD Ice Cats now ended up with the Hudson Valley / 8C Venoms roster. But the difference is the Venom didn't win, and they weren't long for the Hudson Valley area. All right, this came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, all these great players being transferred to Port Huron's roster. Very interesting. So, eventually, Demons become the Prowlers. All right, so the following season, how would this play out? The following season, Port Huron finishes third in the 2015-2016 season, but they lost in the first round. I'm sorry. They didn't lose. They won. They won the whole thing. What am I saying? I'm looking at a different line. Anyway, so yeah, Port Huron ends up winning the championship with Trevor Karasevich as coach, and the Foos, and some other new faces as well, but a lot of faces from the Dayton Demonz squad. Very interesting. How did Demolition fare? Well, again, their name was appropriate. They struggled. They barely made the playoffs by 1 point and bowed out very quickly in the first round. So, tale of two cities now. So, the ending of this was very ironic. Hara Arena closes in the following August. The Demolition had gone dormant. They announced they just didn't have the resources and the manpower in order to put together a team for the next year. But it was all for naught anyway, as Hara Arena closed permanently in August of 2016 under a mountain of debt. Ironically, in 2019, Hara Arena, which had now been vacant for 3 years, was hit by an E4 tornado and just devastated. The roofs torn off, everything, parts of some of the buildings collapsed. And the new owner of the building didn't have the money to pour into restoration and repair because it was just too widespread. So the arena is demolished in early 2021 and is no more. So there we go. A very unceremonious end to a team that really could have been a dynasty, and in a way they were, because they were always at the top of the league. There are 3 seasons in Dayton, and then they go to Port Huron and win the whole thing. To continue the story a little bit, the following season, after the Prowlers won the Cup, the Prowlers ended up with one of the best records in Fed history the following season and was beaten by the Watertown Wolves in the final. So, a 5-year run for the core part of the roster. Of course, the roster changes every year, but there you go. So that is a story of the Dayton Demonz in short. There you go. I hope you enjoyed these little history glances. I enjoyed digging into what happened with these teams and why things unfolded the way they did, and the successes and the low points, and finding out all these neat little things. I love digging into it. I hope you enjoy hearing about it, and I invite you to do some digging of your own. Very interesting. Just to close out, very late Saturday night, I ended up watching video footage of some people had broken into Hera Arena. They were urban explorers and they were taking pictures. Now, they had broken in twice. They broke in once during 2018, and even though the arena was in deplorable condition, it hadn't gotten disturbed by a tornado yet. They went in before the tornado and then after the tornado. Incredible. So very interesting watching that footage. But anyway, there we go. So join me on Tuesday for news and notes, because we got some things to talk about. I'm going to set up a week in advance a little bit for the Port Huron Prowlers press conference, but I'm not going to give away the farm. I'm not going to give away that much. I'm only going to tell you about these rumors. So tune in for that, along with other news from around the league. Make sure you're following me on Facebook and on the Flash Audio Network as well. I am Gary Ryan for the Fed League Flash. Have yourselves a wonderful week ahead.